Hello, Justice Defenders community. I hope this finds you and yours well in the midst of this lockdown. I've been reflecting on what lockdown looks like for members of the prison community. I've had on my mind a teenage girl I met some years ago, imprisoned in Uganda for being in debt alongside her small baby. Wondering what a lockdown means for prisoners like that who are in prison because they're poor, too poor to access bail, or too poor to pay fines. I met at Kiambu prison in Kenya earlier this year someone who had a fine of about £50 because he couldn't pay it. He was to be in prison for a year or two. It seems to me that the pandemic is affecting disproportionately those who are poor and vulnerable. And as justice defenders, we're asking ourselves, what does it look like to radically decongest prisons at this time? How do we serve those who are in prison just because they're poor? What does it look like for the measures which the rest of us are taking around social distancing, around sanitation, around isolating those with symptoms of coronavirus to be implemented in prisons at this time? Thank you for the generosity with which you've journeyed with us up to this point. We're asking ourselves, how do we show up in a new way in the prison communities that we're part of? We've been forged in the trenches. We know what it's like to serve alongside prisoners and prison officers and judges and magistrates who for decades and decades have been asking what it looks like to bring justice in the communities that we're part of. I think we're all trying to figure out, what does it look like to bring justice in the midst of a pandemic? It seems that Britain's still trying to answer this question, and I saw that the number of British prisoners infected with coronavirus has doubled in the last week. Now 10 prisoners here have died, and several prison officers. We've heard of outbreaks in American prisons, and some American prisons being responsible for huge numbers of cases of coronavirus going out into the community. So it's clear that we need to think carefully about how we take care of our people in prison at this time. We're excited to be joining a global conversation around what that looks like, what it looks like to keep the wheels of justice turning in the midst of a pandemic, what it looks like to think differently about how we do court, whether it has to take place in the wooden panelled courtrooms that many of us are familiar with, what it looks like to do justice with the judge in a different place from the prosecutor, with the prisoner still in prison. I've really enjoyed having conversations this week with prisoners and prison officers in Thika prison and Naivasha prison in Kenya over Zoom, seeing how they're facilitating online courts using the computers that we've given them. They're connecting prisons to courts many miles away, allowing people still to receive justice, including in some cases receiving their freedom in the midst of this pandemic. Thank you for the way that you've journeyed with us. Thank you for helping us last year to get 5,000 people released from prisons in Uganda and Kenya. We're asking, what does it look like to achieve numbers like that in the next months in the countries in which we work, so that only those who really need to be in prison are there, and there's fewer of them there, so that social distancing might be more achievable. But others, those who are there because they were poor, too poor to afford a lawyer or bail or a fine, making minor mistakes around being idle or disorderly, for petty theft because they couldn't feed their families. What does it look like to get them out of prison and to reunite those families at this time? Thank you for sharing your thoughts and ideas and resources with us as we wonder how we act with more bravery, with greater solidarity and humility than ever before.